In this topic video, we're going to discuss Enlightened Absolutism in Europe in the 18th century, and eventually we'll talk about the 7 Years' War, in which some of these figures play major roles. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, referred to the 7 Years' War as truly the First World War. And it was a global conflict. And so we'll begin looking at these enlightened monarchs of Europe. So think of this as a combination of what we've talked about so far of absolutism, limited monarchy, and the Enlightenment. And these monarchs being influenced by all of these ideas in what has come to be known as Enlightened Absolutism. So what do I mean by that? Well, Enlightened Absolutism is a form of absolute monarchy, but inspired by the Enlightenment. These Enlightenment monarchs embraced the principles of the Enlightenment, especially its emphasis upon rationality, and then applied those to their territories and their people. They tended to allow things like religious toleration, freedom of speech and of the press, and the right to hold private property. Many of them also fostered the arts, the sciences, and education. So they had a particular impact on the people for which they ruled. And again, Enlightened Absolutism could be seen very much as a precursor to the modern period, which would be the 19th and 20th centuries. The three states or countries that we'll look at and their rulers are first that of Russia, the Russian Empire, and Catherine the Great, who ruled from 1762 until 1796. The second, the ruler of the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, and also the Holy Roman Emperor. His name was Joseph II, and he ruled from 1780 until 1790. The third, the ruler of the country of Prussia, which we have been introduced to before, a relatively, small country in Europe, but under the guidance of Frederick the Great, who ruled from 1740 until 1786, will become one of the major powers of Europe. In fact, the fifth most powerful state in Europe under Frederick the Great and afterwards. So first, we'll look at Catherine the Great, the Tsarina of Russia. Catherine was, without a doubt, one of the most important, powerful, and influential women in history, and certainly in European history. In this class, we don't get to see too many powerful women, whether that's in Europe or outside of Europe. Catherine was certainly deserving of the name the Great. And her beginnings are not simple. She was noble, but she was German. She was not Russian. She was born Princess Sophia. And she was basically used, as many women were, to secure alliances in Europe through marriage. In this case, an alliance with Russia. She was to marry this prince named Peter. Not Peter the Great, we're sometime after that. So in the year 1744, she was brought to Russia as a very young girl. She was apparently quite beautiful, but very petite, very small, and very sought after. And she was to marry the heir of the Romanov throne, of the Romanov dynasty, this being this Grand Prince Peter. For one simple reason, basically, to procreate, to have a child with Peter that would be the heir to the Romanov dynasty. And that was her role, as many women were. For instance, later, Marie Antoinette was Austrian, and she was basically used, more or less, to coalesce an alliance between France and Austria. And this was at this time, Princess Sophia's role. But she went above and beyond. She recognized, she was very intelligent, and she recognized that she'd better adopt Russian thinking, Russian religion, etc., if she was to ever have any sort of autonomy within the Russian Empire. She accepted the Russian language, learning it, and she converted to the religion of Russia, which is Orthodox Christianity. She was an avid reader. She read philosophy, history, treatises on government, and she strove to gain the court's approval in Russia, within the Winter Palace, where the Tsar ruled. And she did. She became very popular within the court at the Winter Palace in Moscow. And she, of course, as of the time, not only was courting her husband, but also others, including those within the Russian army. This would be known as the Imperial Guard of the Winter Palace. And she was more popular with both the Imperial Guard and the court than her husband, Peter. Well, in 1761, Peter became Tsar of Russia, Peter the Third. Peter, for perhaps unknown reasons, really hated Catherine, his wife, and by this time, Princess Sophia had taken a Russian name of Katerina, so she now was Catherine. And Peter the Third hated her. He even tried at one point to have her imprisoned, which at that time was more or less calling your wife nuts and having her sent to a nunnery of which she'd live out the rest of her days in a monastic solitude. But she was, as I said, very, very popular, more popular than Peter, both with the people of Russia and with those at the court. So in 1762, Catherine planned a coup against her husband. And she had the loyalty, again, of the Imperial Guard. She was in a relationship with one of these higher-ups in the Imperial Guard named Orlov. And she attempted a coup. It was successful. Peter III was imprisoned and in fact killed in order to basically further, basically create the appearance that he was a weak leader. She spread the propaganda for which the Russian newspapers picked up, that he was not killed, but rather died of natural causes. And she said those natural causes were of hemorrhoids. So Peter III was killed, but he was forever sort of a joke to the Russian people. Catherine, though, was, as I said, very well read, and she set out on being an enlightened monarch, reading the works of Voltaire and Montesquieu and Diderot and the other people we've talked about. She therefore decided to print a new set of rules for Russia. Russia was, if you think back about Peter the Great, trying to change Russia from this backwards country, which had missed out on so many things that Europe had gone through. Catherine set in motion these certain rules that would bring Russia into, say, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, all the things that it had missed out on. Russia looked very much as it did during the Middle Ages. Most Russians were serfs or those under a very old medieval system of feudalism. And she set about to not only change that, but to present these ideas to all of Europe. And she printed this manuscript, this book, which showed all of Europe that under Catherine, Russia was to be something very different. It was to be enlightened. But as much it was as it was to be enlightened, it was also going to be an empire, picking up where Peter the Great left off. The major enemies then of Russia in its expansion were the countries of Poland to the east and Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, to the south. And therefore she set about rules that would lead the military to expand into these territories and take two major seaports, again, which Peter the Great had attempted, but to secure them, again, the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. And in doing so, not only secure these areas from their enemies of Poland and the Ottoman Empire, but also to expand their empire into Europe, into Eastern Europe. And these lead to two things. One, the partition of Poland, and second, the Russo-Turkish Wars. Again, in the name of Russian Empire, of expansion. And for this role, Catherine enlisted her foreign minister, Nikita Panin, who tried to create this strong Russian alliance with the states of Prussia and Sweden to counter the Austrians, or the Habsburg Empire, in order to gain land in the Crimea, in the Caucasus region, modern-day Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. It was not very successful, and Catherine basically had to let Panin go, and decided to form her own relationships or her own alliances with certain European states or countries. So in the second video, we will pick up with Catherine's rule within Russia and her foreign policy measures.